Okay, so let's move on. So in the next one, 5.5, we are going to combine what we know with lists with some new things that you read about that has to do with strings. So we are given a string, and then what we want to do is that we want to compute a new string that it's only comprised of the words from the original strings that's shorter than a given length. And I think that's kind of a funny exercise. So immediately, or not immediately, I certainly shouldn't say that. It's by no means obvious. But the approach here is that we notice that if I had a list of words, it would seem like a task that I might be confident that I could undertake to find the words in that list which is shorter than a given length. So if I could somehow take this string and transform that into a list of words, solve the problem on the list of words and get a new list out with the words that satisfy my property, then I could maybe take that list and recombine it to a new string and return that. And that's actually going to be my strategy here. Yeah, and we see some helpful hints here that we can use. Okay, so let's try to put that into practice. So I'm just going to go to Visual Studio Code. I'm going to go back to my files. I'm going to open the short words file, and here's the exercise. So I prefer to work with an example, so I'm just going to copy the first 2 lines and put them in, and then I'm going to print out the result. So I just say print the short words are, and then let's print it out like this. And I really like to work with the debugger for these problems. Actually, I think I'm going to not start with the debugger here. I'm going to start with the terminal. So let's do the terminal, because I want to start with something that doesn't have to do with this exercise to avoid confusion, because we need to learn a couple of more things about the connection between strings and lists. So I'm going to start the interactive Python interpreter using Python, and then I'm just going to define a string with words: banana, milk, shake, apples, like this. Now if I call this function, and why is it called this? It's just something that you need to know. What that function will do is that it's going to take the string and cut it into words separated by white spaces. So in this case it will give me 3 words. And you can confirm that if you added something more like pears, then split will give you a longer list. So now you can of course ask, how do I go the other way? So if I have a list, let's call the list for L. And this list is a list of names. So it's Alice, it's Bob, and it's Charlie, like this. How do I take this list and turn it into a string separated by spaces? Like basically put it into this format again. Again, that's just something you need to know. If you start out with a string, that's just a space, and then use this function called join and give it a list, it's actually going to do it. So how does this work? Well, if we replace this with something else like a comma, it's going to put commas between the elements. So effectively what happens is that the join function will take each of the words in each of the elements in the list, Alice, Bob, and Charlie, and then it's going to plonk this one between them and then concatenate it all together. So I could even get a little bit creative. I could say is greater than, and then I get this one out. Of course, I don't need to get that creative for addressing this problem. I just need to be able to go in the reverse direction. So we got join using this construction, and we got split to go from a list to from a string to a list, and this one goes from a list to a string. Okay, so pay attention to that, and then let's return to the exercise. So I'm just going to go up here, and maybe I print out words. We can see that the first input argument is going to be called words, and the second is going to be called max length. Yeah, okay, whatever. So we put in a breakpoint here, because I really like, whenever the exercises start getting a little more complicated, which they're getting now, I really like to just work with them in the debugger. That it actually helps me a lot, and I would really recommend you give it a shot. So I put a breakpoint in here, and that means that when I when I go up here and select debug file from the run menu, Python is going to start executing the file, and the moment it executes a line, oopsie doopsie. This is because I forgot to exit the terminal. It is the bane of my existence, simply. So whenever you press run and you get a weird looking error, interesting. Notice you might be in the terminal and didn't remember to type quit. Okay, forget about that. I go up here and I select debug file. Python will now run the file as usual, but the moment it hits a line that has a breakpoint, it stops, and it allows me to interact with the state that Python is in. So now I can go and do mouse over and check what value words has and what value max length has, and it has these values because it is the values I'm calling the function with. So S is going to be plugged in here, and 4 is going to be plugged in here, and that is why I end up with this state of the program. Okay, so let me start by splitting words. So I do split, and now in order to check what happens when I run this line, I can just copy paste it into the debug console like this, and I can see that this indeed splits it into a long list. So maybe I start by calling this for word list like this. So now I need to get the elements of this word list which is lower than my threshold. So that is called small words, and I just start by making that the empty list. And then what I can do is that I can loop over words in word list like this. Then I can print out the word. Wait, so I did a couple of things here. First of all, I'm defining an empty list because I eventually want this list to contain all the words that are sufficiently small, that is still smaller than max length. Create my list of words as usual, and then I have a for loop where I will iterate over each word in the word list, and then I'm printing out the words one by one. So let me just try to run these 2 lines. I select them, and then I press the keyboard command shortcut. Shift plus Alt plus E. So select, and I just use the Shift key and up arrows to select them. Shift Alt E. That didn't work. That's because it's not defined. So I'm in the debugger, and I didn't actually run this line ever. So I also need to select this line and run it like this, and now it runs. So I simply ran these 3 lines in sequence. First I define this variable, I loop over it, and I print out each element, and that gives me this output here. And now it is, maybe it's like an idea is that I take and compare the length of each of my words. So let's just check what word is at this point. It's the last value that it took when it had this loop. And then I can of course compute the length of my word, and I can check if that is lower than max length. Is it supposed to be less than or equal? I'm not completely confident. I think we'll just go with this version. But since max length is equal to 4, it will not be true in this case. but sometimes it will. So I copy paste it and then I put it into an if-else statement. So I say if it's the word is actually smaller than the length, so it's acceptable, then I append it to small words. And I can just do it using the technique that I used earlier, like this. So I create a new list that just has a single element, and then I concatenate the two lists using this construction. Oh, I didn't define that either. So let me just run this line, and now it's defined. Now I can concatenate them using this construction. Okay, so let's try to confirm if this seemed to work. So in order to confirm this, and this is why I like to work in the debug. It allows me to just check what happens before I've written a lot of code. So in order to check that, I'm just going to select the lines like this, and it's important that you select the full lines, and then press Shift Alt E, and that means that I execute all of these lines. It gives me a lot of output because I use this print statement, but eventually it's going to update. It's also going to update this small words variable, and then we just need to confirm it's updated correctly. And I can, for instance, print it out and see that it just does consist of the words of an acceptable length. Let me actually just confirm that by looking at the problem. Yeah, that looks fine. So now we just need to go from this list back to a string, but remember from what we saw before, we could use the join operation. Or I should call it the join method, not operation. Doesn't really matter. That's just a technicality. So let me just confirm that that also works by using the console. Using the wrong list like this. See, this is how you make bugs. But notice that I found the bug immediately, and that is why the debugger is great. So now it's correct, and then I can just return that, because that's what my function should return. Okay, so I remove the unnecessary junk I had in the bottom of the function. I save it, and then I remove the breakpoint, and I stop Python like this. And now I can run the file again, and maybe I should put in a colon here, and maybe I should remove this print statement because it's just confusing us. Because when I do that, it seemed to work. Let's confirm that this implementation is correct by going to the tests and going to short words, I guess. See what happens. Yeah, it seemed to work. Just for fun, we can just inspect what the tests are actually doing. So we can see that it's calling it with different strings and different thresholds, and then it's just checking what happens. These tests are, okay, it's not being tested that effectively, but it's doing something. Fine. Okay, I'm happy. So I think I'll end here because I'm finally happy.